On the most brutal night of the year, a young woman stands alone in a blizzard. Wallet stolen, phone dead, boyfriend who never came. The cold is killing her slowly. Then a black armored sedan cuts through the storm, and the most dangerous man in the city steps out. He shouldn't notice her. He never notices anyone. But tonight, everything changes. If you stay until the end, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The snow had been falling for 3 hours before Leora Bennett finally accepted that Marcus wasn't coming. She stood outside Halverton Station with her back pressed against the brick wall beneath the narrow overhang, which gave her maybe 2 feet of protection from the storm before the wind shifted and drove the snow sideways anyway. Her coat was a thin wool thing she'd bought secondhand 3 winters ago, and it had stopped being adequate sometime around 9 o'clock. Now it was past 11, and the coat was soaked through at the shoulders and the hem, and every time the wind gusted off the open rail yard behind the station, it hit her like something thrown. She had tried the station doors at 9:15. Locked. The ticket windows dark. A handwritten sign taped to the inside of the glass said, "Closed Christmas Eve. Operations resume December 26th. She hadn't known they closed for Christmas Eve. Marcus was supposed to pick her up at 8:30. She'd taken the last commuter train from Ashfield, a 2-hour ride that had run 40 minutes late because of the weather, and when she'd stepped off the platform into the cold and pulled out her phone to text him that she'd arrived, she'd found the screen dead. The battery had been at 11% when she boarded. She hadn't worried about it because Marcus was supposed to be there. Marcus was not there. She waited 40 minutes on the platform before the station master came through and told her the building was closing. She'd asked to use the phone at the ticket window. He'd looked at her with the particular exhaustion of a man who had been working a holiday shift and wanted nothing more than to get home to wherever home was. And he'd said the phone system was already shut down for the night, that he was sorry, that she should try the payphone on Crestfield Avenue 2 blocks north. She'd thanked him and walked out into the snow. The payphone on Crestfield Avenue had no handset. The metal cord hung from the booth and ended in a clean cut, as if someone had taken wire cutters to it sometime in the last century and nobody had gotten around to caring. She stood in the booth for a minute because it blocked the wind on 3 sides, and then she walked back to the station because she didn't know where else to go. That had been 90 minutes ago. She tried to flag 3 cabs. The first 2 hadn't slowed. The third had slowed, and the driver had rolled down his window, and she'd explained that her wallet had been stolen on the train. A man sitting across from her in the second car. A man with a gray scarf and quick hands, gone before she'd registered what had happened, and that she had no money, no cards, nothing, but if he could take her to her apartment on Delancey Street, she could pay him when they arrived. She had cash in the drawer of her kitchen counter, she promised. The driver had looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite pity, and wasn't quite contempt, and rolled his window back up and driven away. After that, she'd stopped trying to flag cabs. She had gone through the stages of this the way you go through stages of anything you can't control. First, the anger at Marcus, the specific hot fury of standing in the cold while someone who claimed to love you sat somewhere warm and simply didn't show up. She'd run through his likely excuses in her head. He'd fallen asleep, his phone had died, there was traffic, there was always traffic on the holiday, and had found she was sick of making excuses for him. She'd been making excuses for Marcus Hale for 2 years. They came as naturally to her as breathing by now, and she hated that. Then the fear, when the temperature kept dropping and her feet went from cold to painful to something past painful, a dull wooden sensation that she understood was dangerous. She jumped in place for a while, stamping her feet, and it had helped for a little while, and then it hadn't. And now she was past fear and into something quieter and more frightening, a kind of tired acceptance that she recognized was not actually acceptance at all, but the beginning of something worse. She was 26 years old, and she was sitting in the snow outside a closed train station on Christmas Eve, and nobody knew where she was, and nobody was coming. She pulled her knees to her chest and pressed her back harder against the brick and watched the snow come down. It was the kind of snow that fell in curtains, thick and directional, swept by the wind into almost horizontal sheets under the station lights before dropping and accumulating in ridges against the curb and the base of the walls. The street was empty. Had been empty for the last hour. Whatever traffic Christmas Eve generated had finished generating it, and everyone who had somewhere to be was already there, and the city had gone quiet, in the way that cities only go quiet when the weather is bad enough to drive everything indoors. She thought about her grandmother, Evelyn Bennett, 73 years old, who had raised Lyora from the age of 7 after Lyora's parents died in a highway accident during a January storm, not unlike this one. Evelyn, who lived in a small house in Ashfield and had pressed a tin of Christmas cookies into Lyora's hands at the door tonight and made her promise to call when she arrived. Lyora had promised. She had not called. Evelyn would be awake, she knew. Evelyn would be sitting in her chair by the window with the television on low, waiting for the phone to ring, and it wouldn't ring. The thought of Evelyn sitting up waiting for a call that wouldn't come hurt worse than the cold did. She pressed her face against her knees and breathed into the wool of her coat and tried to think clearly. Her options were limited to the point of being nearly non-existent. She could stay where she was and hope that someone came by. She could try to walk to Delancey Street, which was approximately 4 miles from here, in the dark, in a snowstorm, in wet shoes with no feeling in her feet. She could try to find another open business, a bar, a convenience store, anywhere with a phone, though the block she'd walked to find the payphone had shown her nothing but dark storefronts and locked doors. She didn't see a fourth option. She was so deep in the calculation of these 3 bad choices that she didn't hear the car until it had already slowed. It came from the east end of the street, moving quietly for something that large, and when she looked up she saw headlights cutting through the snow, and then the shape of the vehicle behind them. Black, low and wide, some kind of heavy luxury sedan with the particular solid mass of a vehicle that had been modified beyond its factory specifications. It moved with the careful deliberateness of a car being driven by someone who knew exactly where they were going and was in no particular hurry to get there, which was unusual given the conditions. Most people drove fast in snow because fast felt like control. This car moved slow because slow was control. It stopped. Not gradually, not drifting to the curb with the tentative quality of someone deciding at the last second to pull over. It stopped cleanly and completely, as if it had been intending to stop here all along. The engine continued to run. The headlights stayed on. For a moment nothing happened, and Lyora watched it with the detached curiosity of someone too cold to feel much alarm about anything. The driver's door didn't open. The rear door on the curbside did. The man who stepped out was tall, and he stepped into the snow with the ease of someone to whom physical discomfort was a category of experience they had long since made their peace with. He wore a dark overcoat, well cut, the kind of coat that cost more than Lyora made in a month at the bookstore. Dark trousers. No hat. The snow landed in his dark hair, and he didn't seem to notice. He stood beside the open door of the car and looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Not surprise, not pity, not the leering assessment she'd gotten used to bracing for from men in cars who stopped for women alone on dark streets. He looked at her the way you look at a fact you've just been presented with and are taking a moment to determine what to do about. He was probably mid-30s, dark complexion, sharp jaw, eyes that caught the light from the station overhang and gave nothing back. There was a quality to the stillness of him that she would think about later, when she had the luxury of thinking about things. The sense that he was a person for whom the world generally moved around him rather than the other way around. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "How long have you been out here?" His voice was even, not loud. She heard it clearly anyway. She considered lying. The instinct toward dignity that makes you want to minimize the damage, to say, "Oh, not long, just waiting for a ride, everything's fine." She was too cold and too tired for the lie. "Since 9, she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected, scraped raw by the cold. "Maybe before." He looked at her wet coat, her wet shoes, her hands, which she'd stopped being able to feel clearly sometime in the last half hour. He didn't say anything for another moment. Then he reached back into the car and came out with something dark and heavy. A coat, an additional coat folded over his arm, and walked toward her. She tensed. She couldn't help it. A man walking toward her in the dark was a man walking toward her in the dark, regardless of what his face looked like or how good his coat was. He stopped about 4 feet from her and held the coat out, not draping it over her, not moving any closer, just extending it toward her in a way that made clear the choice was entirely hers. "Take this," he said. She stared at the coat. Cashmere, probably. Some dark charcoal color. "I don't," she started. "You're not going to be able to walk in another hour," he said. Not cruel about it, just factual, The way a doctor is factual about a diagnosis. Maybe less. Take the coat. She took the coat. Her hands didn't cooperate the way she wanted them to, and she fumbled with it before getting it around her shoulders and the warmth of it. It was warm. He'd been wearing it, and the lining held heat, hit her like something physical. Her eyes went sharp for a moment with the effort of not reacting visibly to the relief of it. "There's a phone in the car," he said, "if you need to make a call." She looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He seemed to consider the question with the seriousness it deserved rather than brushing it off. "Because you're sitting in the snow on Christmas Eve," he said, "and nobody else stopped." It was not a complicated answer. She thought later that it was the simplicity of it that got her, the absence of anything performative about it. He hadn't said he was a good person. He hadn't said it was the right thing to do. He just said what was true. She got up. Her legs didn't cooperate immediately, and she caught herself on the wall, and he didn't move to help her, which she appreciated more than she could have explained. She steadied herself and walked to the car and got in. The interior was warm and dark and smelled of leather and something else, something she couldn't immediately identify. Another man was already in the car, in the front passenger seat, wide-shouldered, the kind of build that suggested the suit he was wearing was performing considerable structural work. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her existence. A driver behind the wheel, also large, also not looking at her. The man in the good coat got in beside her and pulled the door shut, and the car started moving. "Where do you need to go?" he asked. "Delancey Street," she said. "Number 41. I can pay you when we get there. I have cash at home. My wallet was—" "I'm not going to take your money," he said. The car moved through the snow with the particular quiet of well-insulated luxury, the kind of quiet that costs money to engineer. Through the windows, the city scrolled past, white and muted, the storm softening every edge. She realized she hadn't asked his name. She also realized she was sitting in a car with three men she didn't know, in a city that was mostly empty and mostly dark, heading toward her apartment, which she had just told them the address of. The warmth of the coat was clearing her head, and her head, now that it was clear, was informing her that this situation had variables she had not fully accounted for. She looked at him. He was looking out the window on his side. "I don't know your name," she said. He turned to look at her. There was a beat of something, a micropause that she didn't know how to read. "Damiano," he said. "Leora," she said. He nodded as if filing it. "Are you warm enough?" he asked. "Getting there," she said. They drove in silence for a moment. She watched the storm outside. The city looked beautiful in a way that cities only look beautiful when you're warm enough to appreciate them. "My grandmother is going to be worried," she said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. Came out anyway. "She lives in Ashfield. I was supposed to call when I got in. She's going to think—" She stopped. "She's going to be up all night. Do you want to call her now?" he said. "Yes." She looked at the seat pocket. "You said there was a phone." "Enzo," he said, and the man in the front passenger seat reached into his jacket without turning around and produced a phone and held it back to her over the headrest. She took it. A newer model, matte black case, biometric lock. "It's unlocked," Damiano said. She dialed her grandmother's number from memory. It rang once, half of once, before Evelyn picked up, and the sound of her grandmother's voice, "Leora, Leora, I've been—" was enough that Leora had to press her lips together hard for a moment before she could trust her voice. "I'm okay, Gran," she said. "I'm okay. My phone died and I lost my wallet, but I'm okay. I'm in a car. Someone gave me a ride. I'll be home soon." She heard Evelyn exhale, a shuddering, relieved sound. "I've been sitting here for 2 hours," Evelyn said. "I called Marcus and he didn't pick up." Leora looked at the window. "He didn't pick me up," she said. Silence on the line. "Are you somewhere safe?" Evelyn asked. Leora looked at the man sitting beside her, who was looking out his window again, deliberately not listening, or at least pretending not to, which she understood was a form of courtesy. "Yes," she said. "I think so." She handed the phone back to Enzo without being asked, and Enzo returned it to his jacket with the same efficiency, and neither of them said anything about it. They arrived at her building on Delancey Street 17 minutes later. The car pulled to the curb and idled, and she reached to the door but then stopped. "Thank you," she said. She turned to look at him directly. He was watching her with that same attentive, unreadable quality. Genuinely. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't... She stopped. Let it hang there. Go inside, what? He said. Get warm. She nodded. She started to shrug the cashmere coat off her shoulders. Keep it, he said. I can't... Keep it, he said again. Not harsh. Final. She looked at him for a moment. He held her gaze with a steadiness that should have been intimidating and wasn't, or was, slightly, in a way she couldn't entirely locate. She got out of the car. The cold hit her again, diminished now by the cashmere, and she walked to the door of her building and unlocked it and stepped inside. She looked back once. The car was still there, idling at the curb. It waited until she was through the door. Then it pulled away into the snow and was gone. She stood in the lobby of her building for a moment, dripping on the tile, wearing a coat that cost more than her rent. Her hands were starting to hurt now as the feeling came back into them, a deep burning ache in the fingers. She pressed them against her cheeks and breathed through it. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. She climbed the stairs, unlocked her door, went inside. The apartment was small and cold because she'd turned the heat down before leaving yesterday to save money. And she turned the thermostat up and then went into the bathroom and turned the shower on hot and stood under it for 10 minutes without taking her clothes off, just letting the heat work through the wet wool. And then she stripped everything off and stood there until the shaking stopped. She was running the shower so loud that she didn't hear her phone charge and turn on and start receiving notifications until she got out. She wrapped herself in a towel and sat on the edge of the bed and picked up her phone. 14 text messages from Marcus. She stared at the screen. 14. She opened the thread. The first one, sent at 8:45, said, "Hey, something came up. Can you grab an Uber?" The second, sent 9 minutes later, "Babe, you there?" The messages that followed escalated in a particular way she recognized. Increasingly aggrieved, the tone shifting from apologetic to defensive to, by the fourth message, somehow suggesting that her not responding was the problem, that she was being dramatic, that it wasn't that big a deal, that he'd tried to call and she hadn't picked up. By the 14th message, sent 40 minutes ago, he had arrived at, "You need to stop doing this." She read all 14 messages twice. Then she put the phone face down on the bed and sat for a moment in the quiet of her apartment with the shower still running in the bathroom and the heat ticking on in the vents. She thought about what it had felt like, sitting in the snow for 3 hours, the specific loneliness of it. Not just cold and scared, but the deeper cold of knowing that the person who was supposed to show up hadn't, and that she had known, somewhere beneath the surface of her daily life, for longer than she wanted to admit, that he was the kind of person who didn't show up. She had known, and she had explained it away, and she had made it her job to manage her own expectations down to whatever level he could meet, and she had called that love. She thought about the man in the dark coat who had not known her at all and had still stopped. She picked the phone back up and opened Marcus's thread and typed, "We're done. Don't call me." She sent it before she could reconsider it, because she'd reconsider it forever if she gave herself the chance, and then she set the phone down again and went to turn the shower off. The cashmere coat was on her kitchen chair where she draped it when she came in. She looked at it for a moment in the low light of the kitchen. Damiano. No last name. A car full of large, quiet men. A phone that got handed over without comment. The particular way he'd looked at her, not like she was a problem or a project or a thing to be rescued, just like she was a person, cold and in trouble. And he had the means to address both of those conditions. She went to bed. She dreamed briefly and incoherently about snow and headlights, and then she didn't dream at all. And when she woke, it was past 10 in the morning and her phone was buzzing. Not Marcus. She'd half expected Marcus, had braced for the particular siege of a Marcus who felt wronged. The calls that came in clusters of 3, the voicemails that started contrite and ended accusatory. But the number on the screen was one she didn't recognize, and she answered it without knowing why. "Leora Bennett," the voice said. Not a question. She sat up. "Yes. My name is Enzo Caruso." A pause. "You rode in my employer's car last night." She was fully awake now, the cold morning light coming through the blinds, her warm apartment, the ordinary domestic reality of her bedroom. "I remember," she said carefully. My employer has an unusual request, Enzo said. He'd like to know if you'd be available for coffee this morning. She was quiet for a moment. Your employer, she said. Damiano. Damiano Moretti, Enzo said, and there was a quality in the way he said the last name, a particular weight that suggested he was giving her information he assumed she would recognize. She didn't recognize it, but she noted the weight. Why? She asked. A pause. She got the sense this was not a question Enzo was accustomed to fielding on his employer's behalf. He didn't explain himself to me, he said. He generally doesn't. She looked at the cashmere coat on the kitchen chair through the open bedroom door. Give me an hour, she said. She met him at a small place called Cartier's on Holmes Street, which she would later learn Damiano owned through a shell company, along with several other businesses in this part of the city, though she didn't know that yet. She arrived first, which she suspected was intentional, that Enzo had built time into the instructions to ensure she was seated before Damiano arrived, and she sat in the booth by the window and ordered a coffee she couldn't afford on her bookstore salary and waited. He came in at 11:15 exactly. Enzo held the door. Two other men she hadn't seen before positioned themselves at angles she would, much later, understand were calculated. Not standing guard in any obvious way, just present, occupying space in a particular manner that kept other people at a particular distance without anyone consciously registering why. Damiano crossed the room and slid into the booth across from her without ceremony. In daylight, without the snow and the emergency and the dissociation of hypothermia clouding her assessment, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she'd initially estimated, mid-30s as she'd thought, but there was something in the set of his face that made you read age before you read the actual features. Some quality of contained authority that registered as older than the bones beneath it. He looked like a man who had spent years learning to take up exactly as much space as he intended to, and no more. You came, he said. You had me brought to a place you own, she said. Did you think I wouldn't? Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, a recognition. I wasn't sure, he said. Most people do what I suggest. Must be the company you keep, she said. He looked at her steadily, ordered an espresso without looking at the menu, without looking for the waiter. The waiter simply appeared. She filed this. Your name, he said. Bennett. Are you from here originally? Ashfield, she said. Small town. About 2 hours out. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Are you from here? No, he said. He didn't elaborate. She waited. How are your hands? He asked. Fine, she said. Then, because it was clearly a lie he wouldn't believe, sore. The feeling came back. That's the part that hurts. He nodded. Frostbite risk was real last night, he said. Another 30 minutes and you'd have had damage. How do you know that? I've been in the cold, he said. Simply. As if this were a complete explanation, which somehow it was. She looked at him across the table. He looked back. Whatever the purpose of this coffee was, he seemed to be assembling it slowly, not pushing toward anything, not performing warmth or charm. She'd met men who performed warmth and charm. Marcus was exceptionally good at the performance of warmth and charm in the early stages. And the absence of it in Damiano was strange and not entirely comfortable, and also, she admitted to herself, something like a relief. Why did you want to see me? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. His espresso arrived and he lifted it and drank without the ritual of stirring or adding anything. I wanted to know you got home safely, he said. She stared at him. You could have asked Enzo to call me, she said. You did ask Enzo to call me. That's how this happened. Yes, he said. So why? Because I wanted to know in person, he said. The cafe was warm and the Christmas morning streets outside were quiet, the storm having deposited a foot of fresh snow overnight that sat undisturbed in the pale sunlight. She looked at him and tried to determine what category of person she was looking at. The car, the men, the name said with that particular weight. She wasn't naive. She'd grown up in a small town, but she'd lived in this city for 4 years, and she knew what certain configurations of wealth and insulation looked like and where they tended to come from. But the category didn't match the behavior. Men who moved through the world the way this man moved didn't generally come back the next morning to check. All right, she said finally. I got home safely. My hands hurt, and I'm getting a head cold, and I'm probably going to spend Christmas watching old movies and eating whatever's in my freezer, but I'm safe." "Good," he said. Another silence. This one had a different quality. Not the silence of people who don't have anything to say, but the silence of people who have things to say and are determining the order. "What do you do?" he asked. "Bookstore," she said. "I work at Caldwell's Books on Merchant Street. I'm also finishing a degree. Literature. It's taking longer than it should because I can only afford a class or two a semester." He didn't do the thing she expected, the slight adjustment in posture that people made when they reassessed downward. He just listened. "What about you?" she asked. Another micro pause. "Import and distribution," he said. She almost smiled. It was such a complete non-answer. "Right," she said. "Liora." He said her name like he was trying it out. "What happened last night, before I found you?" She looked at him. It was a direct question, and it assumed an intimacy that their two conversations didn't technically warrant, and she was going to deflect it, and then she decided not to because she was tired of deflecting things. "My wallet was stolen on the train," she said. "My phone died. My boyfriend was supposed to pick me up and didn't. The station was closed. The payphone was broken. No cab would take me without money." She paused. "So I sat in the snow and waited for something to change." He listened to all of it without interruption. "The boyfriend," he said. "Is that resolved?" "I ended it last night," she said. Something in his expression shifted. Barely. A slight softening, or maybe the opposite of softening. She couldn't name it precisely, but she registered it. "Good," he said again. She raised an eyebrow. "You have an opinion on my relationship?" "I have an observation," he said. "A man who doesn't show up in a storm isn't going to show up anywhere." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's true," she said. They sat there in the warm cafe on Christmas morning with the snow outside and two empty cups between them, and something was happening that she didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't attraction, or not only attraction, or maybe it was, but it was also something else. The particular strange gravity that forms between people when they have shared something real, even something as simple as one person being in trouble and another person stopping. She thought about this coat. She'd worn it this morning over her own jacket because the morning was cold. "I should get back," she said. "I have calls to make. My grandmother, my landlord, about the lock. Someone in my building has been saying the front door lock is loose, and I've been ignoring it." He nodded. Made no move to keep her. Didn't offer to drive her. Just accepted the close of the morning the way he seemed to accept everything, as information, noted and filed. She stood and gathered her bag and looked at him once more. "Thank you," she said. "Again. For last night." "Don't thank me," he said. "Why not?" He met her eyes. "Because I didn't do anything," he said. "I just stopped." She thought about that on the walk home. The snow crunching under her boots, the city quiet and white around her, the cashmere coat warming her through the layers. "I just stopped." She thought about the men who hadn't. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the specific way Damiano Moretti had said her name. She was nearly to her building when her phone rang again. Not Enzo this time. A number she didn't recognize, but a local area code, and something instinct adjacent made her pick up. "Ms. Bennett?" A woman's voice, brisk, professional. "This is Patricia Wells calling from Alderton Medical Center. I'm trying to reach family of Evelyn Bennett. We have her listed as having a granddaughter." The cold came back all at once. "This is Leora Bennett," she said. Her voice was steady. She didn't know how. "What happened?" "Ms. Bennett, your grandmother was brought in this morning by a neighbor. She's had what appears to be a stroke. She's stable right now, but we need you to... She didn't hear the rest of it. The phone was at her ear, and the woman was still talking, and Leora was standing in the middle of the sidewalk in the snow, and the world had just rearranged itself into before and after, and she was standing exactly on the line. She got to Alderton Medical Center in 40 minutes, which was faster than the buses were running on Christmas morning and faster than she could have walked. And the only reason she made it that fast was that she stood on the curb outside her building with her phone in her hand and called the one number she had that she knew would answer. Enzo picked up on the second ring. She didn't explain herself. She said, "I need to get to Alderton Medical Center. My grandmother had a stroke." She said it flat and clean because if she said it any other way, she wasn't going to be able to say it at all. There was a pause of maybe 4 seconds. Then Enzo said, "Stay at your door, 8 minutes." It was 7. She sat in the back of a different car, same black, same quiet, different driver, and watched the snow-covered streets of the city move past the window and kept her hands pressed flat against her thighs and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, the way she'd taught herself to do in the bad months after her parents died when she was 7 years old and the world had first demonstrated to her how completely it could come apart without warning. She didn't cry. Not yet. She needed information before she could afford to fall apart, because falling apart took time and energy, and she might need both of those things for something that mattered more. The medical center was a gray concrete building 2 blocks off the river, 12 stories, the kind of building that had been modern in 1987 and had been slowly losing that argument ever since. The lobby smelled of industrial cleaner and recycled air. She found the nurse's station on the 4th floor and gave her name and was directed to a waiting room with orange plastic chairs bolted to the floor and a television mounted high on the wall showing a morning news program with the sound off. A doctor came out 20 minutes later. Dr. Reyes, according to the badge, a small woman with exhausted eyes and the careful composure of someone who delivered bad news so often, she had built a particular architecture for it. "Your grandmother had an ischemic stroke," Dr. Reyes said. "Sometime early this morning, her neighbor found her around 9. She's conscious and she's stable, which is the good news. The bad news is there's some weakness on her left side, and we don't know yet how much of that is going to resolve. We're doing imaging now. We'll know more in a few hours." Leora sat with all of that. "Can I see her?" "Not yet. Maybe an hour." Dr. Reyes looked at her with the specific compassion of someone who didn't have time for compassion, but made it anyway. "Is there anyone you can call to be with you?" Leora thought about it. "I'll be fine," she said. She sat in the orange plastic chair and stared at the silent television and tried to make herself eat the vending machine crackers she'd bought with the $2 in her coat pocket. She got through half of them. The waiting room filled up and emptied over the course of the next hour, with various people in various states of distress, and she watched them come and go and felt the specific loneliness of being the only person in the room who was there alone. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she now recognized. "Were you able to get there?" Not a question the way he wrote it, a statement with a question embedded. She typed back, "Yes, waiting. They don't know yet how bad." A pause. Then, "I'm outside." She stared at the message for a moment. Then she got up and walked to the window that looked out over the entrance and looked down, and there was the black car at the curb, idling in the snow. She went down. He was leaning against the car with his hands in the pockets of a different coat from last night, but the same quality of coat. And when she came through the lobby doors into the cold, he looked at her with an expression that she still couldn't fully categorize. Not pity. She would have reacted badly to pity. Something more like recognition. The look of someone who knew what this particular kind of waiting felt like. "You didn't have to come," she said. "No," he agreed. She stood next to him in the cold and looked out at the snow-covered parking lot and the street beyond it and the gray sky above all of it. Christmas Day. The city was as quiet as it ever got. "She raised me," Leora said. "After my parents died. I was 7. She didn't have to. She was already retired. She had her garden and her books and her routines. But she did it." She stopped. "She used to leave notes in my lunchbox when I was in school, every single day for 9 years. I never told her how much—" She stopped again. Damiano said nothing. He let the silence be what it was. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment. "You don't need to hear this." "I'm here," he said. "I can hear it." It was such a simple thing. She had no idea why it nearly broke her. She went back upstairs at the 1-hour mark and was taken to her grandmother's room by a nurse who had the efficient kindness of a person who was good at their job and knew it. The room was small and white and full of the machinery of monitoring, and Evelyn was in the bed looking smaller than Leora had ever seen her, which was the thing she hadn't prepared for. The specific shock of someone who has always seemed solid and permanent suddenly looking fragile. Evelyn's eyes were open. The left side of her face was slightly slack. When she saw Leora, her right hand came up. Leora sat in the chair beside the bed and took her grandmother's hand and held it. "I'm here, Gran," she said. "I'm right here." Evelyn squeezed her hand. Weak, but there. Don't, Evelyn started. Her speech was slow, slightly labored, the words assembling themselves with visible effort. Don't make that face. What face? The face you made, Evelyn said, when you were 7. When they told you. A pause. I'm not going anywhere. Leora pressed her grandmother's hand against her cheek and said nothing. She stayed for 2 hours. When Evelyn slept, she sat and watched the monitors and tried to make a list of what needed to happen. The insurance, the bills, the extended care if it came to that, her own schedule, the classes she was taking, the hours at the bookstore. She made the list because making lists was something she could control when everything else was outside her reach. By the time she came back down to the lobby, it was mid-afternoon and she was running on no food and no sleep, and the kind of shallow, insufficient adrenaline that carries you through a crisis and leaves you hollowed out on the other side. Damiano was still in the lobby. She stopped. He was sitting in one of the lobby chairs near the entrance, not the orange plastic kind from upstairs. The lobby had better chairs. And he had a coffee cup in one hand and a phone in the other, and he was reading something on the phone with his brow slightly furrowed, and he looked, in that moment, startlingly ordinary. Not the dark car and the waiting men and the weight in Enzo's voice when he'd said the last name. Just a man sitting in a hospital lobby on Christmas afternoon, waiting. He looked up when she approached. "You've been here this whole time," she said. "Yes," he said. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because you looked like someone who was going to refuse to admit they needed anything," he said, "and then need something." She sat down in the chair next to him. The lobby was quiet. A few other people scattered around, families in hushed conversations. A nurse walking through. "She's stable," Leora said. "They think the weakness on her left side might improve. They don't know about the speech yet. She was talking, but it was slow." "That can improve," he said. "With time and the right care." "The right care costs money," she said. It came out more blunt than she intended. "I'm going to have to look at what her insurance covers and whether I can—" She stopped herself. "Sorry, this isn't your problem." "Tell me what the coverage looks like," he said. She stared at him. "I just said it's not your—" "I heard what you said," he said. "Tell me what the coverage looks like." There was no particular forcefulness in it. It was just a direction, stated with the calm of someone who was used to directions being followed. She felt the urge to resist it on principle, which she recognized as the part of her that defaulted to managing everything alone, because alone was the only option she'd reliably had. She told him what she knew about the coverage, which wasn't much because she'd never had to look at it closely before. He listened and asked 2 or 3 specific questions that told her he understood the landscape better than she did, and then he said he'd have someone look at the full picture in the morning and determine what was available. "I'm not asking you to—" "I know," he said. "Damiano." She said his name with something that was almost an edge. "I don't know you. You don't owe me anything." He looked at her steadily. "No," he said. "I don't." "So why are you doing this?" The question hung between them. He looked at her for a long moment with that contained, unreadable quality, and then he said, "Because I want to, and because I can, and because those 2 things don't always line up, and when they do, I've learned not to argue with them." She didn't have an answer for that. He drove her home at 4 in the afternoon and walked her to the door of her building, which he hadn't done before. She turned at the door and looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it, today." "Get some sleep," he said. "You keep telling me practical things," she said. "Get warm. Get some sleep. Don't thank me." "Practical things are generally more useful than the other kind," he said. She almost smiled. "Good night, Damiano." "Good night, Leora." She went upstairs and ate something from the freezer and was asleep by 7. The next 3 days had a particular texture. She went to the hospital every morning and stayed until evening and came home and slept and went back. Evelyn was improving incrementally. The weakness on her left side was responding to early physical therapy, and her speech was sharpening, the words coming faster, the gaps narrowing. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Leora was cautiously taking that at face value because the alternative was to catastrophize. And catastrophizing was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Damiano sent Enzo with coffee on the 2nd morning. She accepted it. On the 3rd morning, Damiano came himself. In the early afternoon, and they sat in the lobby together for an hour and talked while Evelyn slept upstairs. Not about the situation, just talked. He asked about the bookstore, about her degree, about Ashfield, and he answered when she asked about him in a way that was more revealing in what it omitted than what it included. He'd grown up with very little. He'd built what he had from nothing. He had no family left. He did not say how he'd built it, or what specifically he'd built. And she didn't push because she was starting to understand the shape of him well enough to know which questions would produce walls and which would produce windows. On the fourth day, the situation changed. She arrived at the hospital at 9 in the morning and found a different energy in the hallway outside her grandmother's room. Evelyn was awake and sitting up at a slightly better angle than before, which was good. What was not good was the woman standing at the window in her grandmother's room when Leora pushed the door open. She was maybe 40, brunette, wearing the kind of clothes that communicated wealth without announcing it, sharp cheekbones. The posture of someone who had been beautiful her whole life and had arranged the world around that fact. She turned when Leora came in. Leora looked at Evelyn. Evelyn's expression was the careful neutral of a woman who had survived 7 decades of complicated situations by maintaining surface calm. "Leora," Evelyn said. "This is Valentina De Luca. She came to..." A pause. "She says she knows Damiano." The name landed differently in this room than it did anywhere else, and Leora felt the difference. A slight adjustment in the atmosphere, a pressure change. Valentina looked at Leora with a smile that had excellent form and no warmth. "You must be Leora Bennett," she said. Her voice was low and accented, Italian, or the practiced memory of Italian. "Damiano mentioned you." Leora set her bag down on the chair. "I don't know who you are," she said. "No," Valentina said. "I don't suppose you would." A pause, perfectly timed. "I'm his fiancée." The word hit the room. Evelyn's hands tightened slightly on the blanket. Leora kept her face completely even through an act of will that cost her something. "Former fiancé," Leora said. "Or current." Something crossed Valentina's face. Not quite a flinch. A recognition that the girl from Ashfield wasn't going to fold immediately, which hadn't been the expected outcome. "We have an understanding," Valentina said. "Damiano and I. We've had it for years. These things go through phases." "What phases?" Leora asked. "Interruptions," Valentina said. Her eyes moved to the coat that Leora had draped over her bag. The cashmere coat. She recognized it. Leora could see that she recognized it. "He has phases where he gets distracted. He always comes back." Leora looked at the woman for a moment, assessed her. Not as a threat, exactly. She and Damiano weren't anything. They'd had coffee and sat in a hospital lobby, and that was the sum of it. She had no claim to make and no ground to defend. But she assessed the woman as a person, which she did reflexively with everyone. And what she read was someone who was used to winning by making other people feel small. "I think you should go," Leora said. "This is my grandmother's room, and she's recovering." Valentina looked at her grandmother. "Of course," she said pleasantly. She moved toward the door and then paused beside Leora. Up close, she smelled of something expensive. "He's a generous man when he's interested in someone," she said, her voice low, conversational, almost kind. "The coat, the cars, the attention." A beat. "Enjoy it while it lasts. This world isn't meant for people like you, and the longer you pretend it is, the harder the landing." She left. Leora stood in the door for a moment after she was gone. Then she went to her grandmother's bedside and sat down. "I don't know who she is," she said. "I know," Evelyn said. "She came here specifically to..." She stopped, breathed. "She found out where you were." "She was here when I woke up," Evelyn said. "I thought she was a hospital administrator." A pause. "She's not a hospital administrator." "No?" Leora said. "She's not." She sat with her grandmother for an hour and then walked out into the hallway and called Damiano. He picked up on the first ring. "Valentina De Luca," she said. "Tell me who she is." A silence. 2 seconds, 3. The kind of silence that contained information. "Where are you?" he said. "4th floor hallway, Alderton Medical. She just left my grandmother's room." Another silence, shorter, and then something happened in the quality of it. She could hear the shift, some compression, something controlled with visible effort. "I'm coming," he said. "You don't need to—" "I'm coming," he said, and he was already gone. He arrived in 20 minutes, walked off the elevator and came down the hallway toward her with a pace that was controlled and unhurried and somehow also clearly furious, which was a combination she hadn't seen before and which she found, in spite of everything, clarifying. He stopped in front of her and looked at her face. Reading her, she understood, checking for damage. "Did she touch you?" he said. "She talked to me," Leora said. "I'm not made of glass." "What did she say?" "She said you two have an understanding. She said you always come back." She kept her eyes on his. "She came here, Damiano, to my grandmother's hospital room." The muscle in his jaw tightened. "She won't come near you again." "That's not what I'm asking." She stepped closer. "I'm asking if she's right. Is there something between you two that I should know about? Because if there is—" "No," he said, "there isn't." "Then why does she think there is?" He was quiet for a moment. She could see him deciding something. How much? Which door? "She's the daughter of Salvatore De Luca," he said. "He and I have a business arrangement that goes back 12 years. There was a time when Valentina and I were—" He stopped. "It ended 4 years ago. I ended it. She's never accepted that." "She knew to come here," Leora said. "She knew my grandmother was here. She knew your coat." She paused. "How closely is she watching you?" "Too closely," he said. "I'm going to address it." "Damiano." She said his name the way she was learning to say it, with the weight it required. "I need to ask you something directly." "Ask. What am I to you?" The words came out steadier than she felt. "I'm nobody. I work in a bookstore. I met you 4 days ago in a snowstorm. You've been here every day, you're involving yourself in my grandmother's care, and now your ex-fiancé is turning up in hospital rooms." She held his gaze. "What is this?" He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the window at the end of the hallway, the snow was still falling, lighter now, drifting. "I don't know yet," he said. And then, before she could react to that, "But I know I haven't wanted to leave." She looked at him. He looked back. And there it was, out in the open between them, the thing that had been assembling itself in the silence of coffee cups and hospital lobbies and the weight of a cashmere coat, and it was not convenient and not simple, and not anything she'd had the presence of mind to prepare for. She was still standing there when her phone rang. She glanced down. The number on the screen was one she recognized with a cold drop in her stomach. Marcus. She rejected the call. It rang again immediately. "Someone you need to deal with?" Damiano asked. "My ex," she said. "He calls twice?" "He calls until someone picks up," she said. "It's his thing." She rejected it again. "I'll deal with it later." The third call came as they were walking back toward her grandmother's room. She stopped, because 3 calls in 3 minutes was Marcus escalating to the level where he showed up places if you didn't answer, and she'd been the person who cleaned up those situations before, and she was not going to let that happen here. She picked up. "Marcus," she started. "You broke up with me over a text," Marcus said. His voice had the specific controlled volume of someone who was furious and in public. "On Christmas Eve." "Christmas morning," she said. "And I told you not to call." "Where are you?" he said. "We need to talk about this in person." "We don't," she said. "Leora." His voice shifted. "Come on. 2 years. You end 2 years with a text after I made one mistake?" "You didn't pick me up," she said. "I was in the snow for 3 hours. I almost had frostbite." She heard her voice going flat in the way it went flat when she was past a certain point. "This wasn't the first time you didn't show up. It was just the first time I noticed what that actually felt like." "Whose coat are you wearing in that picture?" Marcus said. She went still. "What picture?" she said. "Someone sent me a picture," Marcus said. "You, outside some restaurant, wearing a man's coat." "Who is he, Leora? Is that why you broke up with me? Because you—" "Someone sent you," she repeated. "Who?" "It doesn't matter who—" "It matters," she said. Her eyes went to Damiano, who was standing 3 feet away, not looking at her, very specifically not looking at her, with the particular focus of someone who was listening to every word. "Someone photographed me and sent it to my ex-boyfriend. That matters." A pause on Marcus's end. "I just want to know who he is." "He's nobody you need to worry about," she said. Don't call me again." She hung up. She stood in the hospital hallway with the phone in her hand, and the implications of it arranging themselves in her mind like pieces of something she didn't want to see the shape of. Someone had photographed her. Someone had found Marcus's number. Someone had sent it to him deliberately to cause a specific kind of disruption, and that someone had access to enough information about her life to know who Marcus was and how to reach him. She turned to look at Damiano. He was already looking at her. "Valentina," he said. Not a question. "How much does she know about me?" Leora asked. "How much did she find out in 4 days?" His expression had gone very still in a way she hadn't seen before. Still in the way that things go still before they move fast. "Enough," he said quietly. "Too much." "What does that mean for me?" Leora asked. "What does that mean for my grandmother?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she understood, standing in that hospital hallway under the fluorescent lights with the snow still coming down outside, that she had just asked the question that divided the world into before and after. Not just for her. For both of them. Because the answer to that question wasn't a small answer, and whatever he said next, neither of them was going to be able to pretend this was still just a coffee and a hospital lobby anymore. He said it himself, finishing the thought she hadn't finished, and the fact that he knew exactly what she'd been thinking was the most frightening thing that had happened to her in 5 days, and 5 days had contained a lot of frightening things. She looked at him in the fluorescent hallway light and waited. "Come with me," he said. "My grandmother is asleep," he said. "You told me she sleeps until 4. It's 2:15. He looked at her with the directness she was getting used to, that complete absence of deflection. "I need to tell you some things, and I need to not tell them to you in a hospital hallway." She went. They sat in a private room on the ground floor that the hospital apparently made available for family consultations, a small room with a round table and 4 chairs and a box of tissues on the windowsill that she found quietly devastating in its implication. Enzo stood outside the closed door. The driver stayed with the car. It was just the two of them, and the round table, and whatever Damiano was about to say. He didn't sit. He stood at the window with his back half turned to her, looking out at the parking lot, and she understood this was not evasion, but the way he organized himself before something difficult, the way some people pace and some people go still. He went to windows. "Salvatore De Luca," he said. "You need to understand who he is before I can explain Valentina." "All right," she said. "He controls distribution networks across 4 states, moving product, moving money, moving people. When it comes to that," he turned from the window slightly. "He and I have operated in parallel for 12 years. Not together, parallel. There's a difference. We don't conflict because we've respected boundaries." She listened. She was good at listening. It was the thing she'd always been good at. And right now she was listening not just to what he said, but to the architecture of it. What got said first, what came after. "4 years ago, Valentina and I were involved," he continued. "It was her father's idea as much as anything else. A merger of interest dressed up as a relationship. I went along with it longer than I should have because Salvatore and I were in a period of negotiation that required goodwill, and ending it with his daughter wasn't compatible with goodwill." He paused. "I ended it anyway. The negotiation survived. Salvatore is pragmatic. Valentina is not." "She's been watching you," Leora said. "For 4 years?" "Intermittently. She surfaces when she thinks there's something to surface for." He turned fully from the window now and looked at her. "I want you to understand that I didn't know she knew about you until today. I didn't know she had surveillance on me. That's a problem I'm dealing with separately, and I'm dealing with it today." "What does dealing with it mean?" she asked. "It means she won't come near you again," he said, "or your grandmother." She looked at him. "I'm not going to ask you specifically what that means." "No," he said. "You probably shouldn't." She sat with that. The box of tissues on the windowsill, the closed door with Enzo outside it, the specific quality of the silence in the room. "There's something else," she said, because there was. She could feel it in the way he was standing, the way he'd said, "Before I can explain Valentina," the before implying an after that was still coming. He looked at her for a long moment, then he sat down across from her, which he hadn't done yet, and the sitting down was its own kind of signal. He put his hands flat on the table. "Marcus Hale," he said. The name in his mouth was wrong. She felt it before she understood why. What about him? She said slowly. I had someone look into him, Damiano said. After the call. When you told me someone had sent him the photograph. You had someone look into Marcus, she repeated, flat, testing the sentence. Yes. When? While we were still in the hallway, he said. It took 40 minutes. She stared at him. You ran a background check on my ex-boyfriend in 40 minutes. It's not a background check in the conventional sense, he said. It's more, He stopped. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is what it found. She said nothing. Her hands were in her lap and she pressed them down against her thighs. The wallet, Damiano said. On the train, the man with the gray scarf. She went cold. Marcus hired him, Damiano said. The room was very quiet. She heard herself breathing, in and out. She heard the heating system in the wall. She heard faintly, through the closed door, some sound from the hospital corridor, someone being called over an intercom. Say that again, she said. Marcus Hale paid a man named Derry Cook $400 to board the Ashfield commuter on December 24th and take your wallet. He said it level without softening because she'd asked him to say it again, and that meant she wanted the straight version. Cook has done work for Hale before, debt collection mostly. This was different. She thought about the man on the train. Gray scarf, quick hands. Gone before she'd registered what happened. She'd been sitting across from him for 40 minutes, and she'd thought he was just a man on a train. Why, she said. Damiano's hands were still flat on the table. Our best read is that he wanted you stranded. He knew you were coming back from your grandmother's on Christmas Eve. He knew the station would be closed. He wanted you in a position where you needed him. A pause. Where you'd call him. Be grateful. Forgive whatever you'd been angry about before you left. She sat with that, turned it over, looked at all its sides. 2 years. 2 years of Marcus being late, being absent, being the person she made excuses for, and she'd been doing that because she thought it was just who he was, his particular damage, the way some people couldn't show up for things. Not because he'd engineered situations that required her forgiveness. Not because he'd been managing her. He didn't pick me up, she said. He knew I was out there. He knew I had nothing. Yes, Damiano said. I was in the snow for 3 hours, she said. Yes. He sent me 14 texts, she said. Her voice was very flat now, the flatness of something that has gone past the temperature where it breaks and arrived somewhere harder. Blaming me. By the end, he was blaming me. I know, Damiano said. I heard the call. She stood up, not dramatically. She just needed to not be sitting. She walked to the window and stood where he'd stood and looked out at the gray parking lot and the gray sky and the dirty snow piled at the curb. She'd almost had frostbite. The doctor had said 30 more minutes. Another 30 minutes in that cold and she'd have had real damage, the kind that didn't entirely heal, and Marcus had known she was out there because she'd been there, because he'd arranged for her to be there. How sure are you? She said. Sure enough, he said. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. The cold of it was clarifying, the way cold always was. He's been calling, she said, since I broke up with him, multiple times a day. I know, Damiano said. We need to talk about that. She turned from the window. Talk. Cook. The man on the train, he talks. For the right consideration, he told us he was given your number, your schedule, your grandmother's address in Ashfield. He paused. Marcus had details about your life that you would have given him, information he filed away and used. My grandmother's address, she said. Yes. She thought about Valentina in her grandmother's room this morning. Thought about how Valentina had found out about Evelyn, about Alderton Medical, about the coat. Thought about a photograph of her outside a restaurant sent to her ex-boyfriend. Valentina and Marcus, she said. They're connected. Damiano's expression changed. A slight tightening, the look of someone watching someone else arrive at a conclusion they'd already reached and aren't sure how much to confirm. We think Valentina reached out to Hale after she identified you, he said. We think she gave him the photograph, and he gave her whatever he had on you. An exchange of information between two people who both want the same outcome. They want me gone, she said. Both of them. Yes, he said. She stood in the family consultation room with the tissue box on the sill and let the full shape of it land. Valentina with her access to surveillance and her father's networks. Marcus with 2 years of accumulated knowledge about Lyora's life, her schedule, her vulnerabilities. Two people who had never met each other until a week ago, coordinating against a woman who worked in a bookstore and had done nothing to either of them except exist at the wrong moment. She was angry. She was deeply, coldly, structurally angry in a way that didn't manifest as heat, but as a kind of extreme clarity, where the edges of things became very precise, and she could see exactly what each thing was. "Tell me about Salvatore De Luca," she said. Damiano looked at her carefully. "Why?" "Because Valentina is his daughter, and she just aligned herself with my abusive ex-boyfriend to come after me through my grandmother, and I want to understand the full landscape." She met his eyes. "Tell me." He told her. Not everything. She understood she was getting a selective version, edited for what he'd decided she needed and what he'd decided he wasn't going to put on her. But enough. Salvatore De Luca was powerful, old network, the kind of man whose reach was wide and largely invisible. He had not sanctioned what Valentina had done. He was pragmatic, as Damiano had said, and what Valentina had done was not pragmatic. It was personal. It was a woman acting outside her father's awareness, which was either stupid or desperate or both. "Would her father know what she's doing?" Leora asked. "Not yet," Damiano said. "Possibly not until I tell him." "You're going to tell him?" "Yes," Damiano said. "This afternoon." "And when you do?" "He'll pull her back," he said. "Salvatore doesn't like problems that he didn't create and can't control. I'll make clear to him that his daughter has created a problem." "That's it?" she said. "He pulls her back and it's done?" "With Valentina, yes." He paused. "With Marcus Hale, there are other considerations." "He committed a crime," she said. "He paid someone to rob me." "Yes," Damiano said. "He did." "Then I should go to the police," she said. Damiano was quiet for a moment in the specific way that communicated that this sentence was more complicated than she was presenting it. "Cook won't testify," he said. "He'd be admitting his own involvement. The money changed hands in cash. Hale will deny everything and hire a lawyer who costs more than your bookstore makes in a year, and it will go nowhere." He paused. "That's the formal option." "And the informal option," she said. "What does that look like?" Another pause. He was reading her, how much she was asking, how much she actually wanted to know. "It looks like Marcus Hale understanding clearly and permanently that you are not someone he is allowed to contact or approach, or have approached," Damiano said. "It looks like that understanding being delivered in a way he takes seriously." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. He blinked, slightly. "Okay." "Yes," she said. "I trust your judgment on the method. I trust that it won't—" She stopped, chose. "I trust you." The words landed in the room. She watched him receive them. 3 words that were both simpler and more complicated than everything else she'd said in this conversation. "Leora," he said. "Don't," she said. "Don't tell me to think about it or make sure. I've had 5 days to figure out who you are. I've watched you every day for 5 days, and you've been the same person every time, and that's more consistency than I've gotten from most people over years." She stopped, breathed. "I trust you. That's what I said." He held her gaze. Something moved through him, something she could see but not name, a kind of shifting. The way ice shifts when something beneath it moves. "All right," he said quietly. She nodded. She went back to her chair and sat down, and for a moment neither of them said anything. And in the silence she became aware that she was exhausted in a way that went down to the cellular level. The accumulated weight of 5 days of fear and cold and hospitals and revelations, all of it sitting on her chest like something physical. "I need to go back to my grandmother," she said. "I know," he said. "Will you?" She stopped. The question was embarrassing in a way she didn't want to examine. "Will you still be here when I come out?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She nodded and stood, and he opened the door for her, and she walked back out into the hospital corridor and up to the 4th floor, and she sat beside her grandmother's bed for an hour while Evelyn slept, and she held her grandmother's hand and looked at her face. The slight slack on the left side slowly, incrementally improving, the color better than it had been yesterday, and thought about what it meant to trust someone. She'd trusted Marcus, She'd trusted a man who had cataloged her vulnerabilities and used them, who had paid someone $400 to put her in danger so that she would need him. She'd called that love, and she'd organized 2 years of her life around it. She thought about the difference between that and a man who had stopped a car in a snowstorm and held out a coat and waited for her to choose. At 4:15, her phone buzzed. Not a call. A text from a number she didn't recognize. No area code she could place. The girl who doesn't know what she's walked into. She stared at it. Another text, seconds later, from the same number. Ask him about the Delancey fire. Ask him what happened to the family on the 3rd floor. Ask him whose order it was. She went very still. The Delancey fire. She lived on Delancey Street. She'd lived there for 2 years. A third text. He saved you from the snow. Sweet story. Now ask him what he burned down before you got there. She sat in her grandmother's hospital room with the phone in her hands and read the 3 messages twice and then again, and felt the ground do something she hadn't felt it do since she was 7 years old and a police officer had come to her classroom door. She looked up. Evelyn was still asleep. The monitors were steady. She typed back to the unknown number. Who is this? The response came in under 10 seconds. Someone who wants you alive, which is more than you can say for the man downstairs. She stood up slowly, set the phone face down on the chair, walked to the window and pressed her hands flat against the cold glass and looked out at the parking lot 4 floors below where the black car sat at the curb, engine running, a thin thread of exhaust rising into the cold air. She stood at that window for 60 seconds. She counted them. 60 seconds of looking at the black car and the exhaust thread and the gray parking lot and making herself breathe in through her nose and out through her mouth the way she'd learned to do when she was 7, and the world had first shown her it could dissolve without warning. Then she picked up the phone and typed, "What fire? What family? Give me something real, or I'm blocking this number." She waited. 20 seconds. 30. December 3rd, 2 years ago, 41 Delancey Street, 3rd floor unit. Rafael and Carmen Vega and their daughter Nina, age 9. Fire started in the building's electrical panel. Official cause, faulty wiring. Real cause, the building needed to be cleared for a buyer who didn't want tenants with rent-controlled leases. Her hands went cold. She had moved into 41 Delancey Street 14 months ago. She had heard from her landlord, almost as a footnote, that the previous tenant on her floor had relocated. She had not asked why. She had not asked about a fire. Who ordered it? She typed. The reply took longer this time. Long enough that she thought they were done, that the number would go silent, that she'd be left with half a picture and no frame. Then, the building was purchased through Castellan Property Holdings, shell company, traces back to Moretti Syndicate Holdings if you know where to look. The family on the 3rd floor lost everything. The little girl has burns on her arms that will never fully heal. Ask him. Look him in the eye and ask him. She turned from the window. Evelyn was still asleep. The left side of her face, the slightly slack left side that was slowly coming back. Her grandmother's hand on top of the blanket, thin-skinned and familiar. She walked out of the room, down the corridor, down the stairs because she couldn't stand to wait for an elevator, through the lobby, out the front doors into the cold. Damiano was outside the car, standing where he'd stood before, hands in his coat pockets, and he saw her face when she came through the doors, and something in him shifted immediately, the way a man shifts when he's spent his life reading approaching danger, and his body does it before his mind catches up. She stopped 4 feet from him. Castellan Property Holdings, she said. The name landed. She watched it land. The specific quality of stillness that came over him was not innocence. She knew what innocence looked like when someone was accused of something. The confusion, the rush to explain, the instinctive reaching toward their own integrity. This was not that. This was a man receiving a word he recognized. "Where did you hear that?" he said. 41 Delancey Street, she said. 3rd floor. December 3, 2 years ago. Rafael and Carmen Vega. Their daughter Nina. Her voice was flat, and she was making it flat the same way you press a wound, deliberately, with pressure. "Tell me." He looked at her for a moment. His jaw was set. "Come inside," he said. "No," she said. "Right here. Tell me right here." Enzo had straightened near the car. She registered it peripherally. 2 other men, positioned at distances she now understood were not coincidental, also adjusting. Castellan holds properties across the city, Damiano said. His voice was low and even, including several on Delancey. Including mine, she said. Yes. And the fire. A pause. 2 seconds. 3. Enough. There was an investigation, he said. The official... Don't, she said. The word came out sharp enough that Enzo moved slightly, and Damiano held up one hand without looking at him, and Enzo stopped. Don't give me the official version. I just read a text that told me a 9-year-old girl has burns on her arms. Did you know about it? Leora. Yes or no? The pause was the answer. She knew it before he said anything. The pause was the thing she'd spend months coming back to later, that specific silence, because a real no comes fast and clean, and this didn't. It was handled by a property manager who made decisions outside his authority, Damiano said. When I found out... When did you find out? She said. After. How long after? 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, she said. And the family. They were relocated, he said. Compensated. I made sure... You made sure, she said. Money. You gave them money. Leora. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before, a roughness. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. I found out, and I dealt with it, and the man responsible dealt with it, she said. What does that mean? Same thing as dealing with Marcus? Same thing as dealing with Valentina? He looked at her. She looked back. The cold between them was not just weather. A 9-year-old girl has scars, she said, because of a property you own, managed by a man who worked for you, cleared for a buyer who was bringing you money. She felt her voice wanting to crack and refused it. I live in that building. I live on the floor above where they were. I moved in 14 months after. I know, he said. You knew when you drove me home, she said. On Christmas Eve. You knew whose building it was. Yes, he said. The word hit her like the cold had hit her on Christmas Eve. Total, everywhere, no part of her untouched. She turned and walked back toward the hospital entrance. Leora. He moved, not grabbing her, not blocking her, just moving to be in her line of sight. I need you to hear the rest of it. Not right now, she said. Someone sent you that information, he said. Someone timed it. Someone who knew you'd be here, knew you'd just been told about Marcus, knew exactly when to hit you with this, to do the most damage. She stopped. Think about who benefits, he said. His voice was controlled, but there was an urgency underneath it, careful and contained. I'm not asking you to forgive anything. I'm asking you to think about who sent those texts and why they sent them now. She stood with her back half turned to him. Valentina, she said. Or someone working with her, he said. Someone who doesn't want you to trust me right now. Someone who needs you isolated from... His phone rang. She heard it. He glanced at it, and his face did something she hadn't seen it do before. A slight blanching, a compression. I have to take this, he said. He looked at her. Please don't go anywhere. Please. The please. She'd never heard him use the word. She stayed. He stepped away and answered, and she heard the cadence of the conversation without the content, his voice dropping low, his body going very still in the dangerous way. The way she now understood meant something was wrong, and he was deciding how wrong and what to do about it. He came back in 40 seconds. Your grandmother, he said. Her heart stopped. She's fine, he said immediately, reading her face. She's fine. But someone just tried to access her room. A man, not hospital staff, got to the 3rd floor before a nurse flagged him. He's gone. Security is reviewing footage. The cold was absolute now. They went after her, Leora said. It's a message, Damiano said. His voice had changed. The control was still there, but underneath it was something harder. It's Valentina telling me she's not done. A message, Leora said. To you, through my grandmother. Yes. She looked at him. Her jaw was tight enough to ache. What are we doing? She said. Right now. What happens right now? He looked at her for a moment, and she saw him calculating what to include, what to protect her from. And she shook her head once, sharply. All of it, she said. I'm done being managed. Tell me all of it, he told her. Valentina had moved faster than expected. The reach out to Salvatore, which Damiano had planned for this afternoon, had been preempted. Valentina had already spoken to her father, had framed the situation in her terms first, had told Salvatore that Damiano was destabilizing their business arrangement over a woman he'd known for 5 days. Salvatore, pragmatic as he was, had called for a meeting. Tonight. Non-negotiable. The kind of call Damiano couldn't decline without the refusal being its own statement. If you go to that meeting, Leora said, and Valentina has already framed it, I know, he said. She'll have the room, Leora said. She's had days to set the narrative. You'll be defending yourself. Yes, he said. What does Salvatore De Luca do when he decides someone is a liability to his operation? A pause. Damiano. What does he do? He removes the liability, he said. She breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Then you can't go without something she doesn't know you have, Leora said. You need to walk in there with something that changes the room. He looked at her. What do you know about changing rooms? I know that whoever gets to define the story first usually wins, she said. I've watched it happen in that bookstore for 4 years. Publisher reps, landlords, Marcus. The person who sets the frame wins. Valentina set your frame with her father. You need to break it. How? He said. The property manager, she said. The one who handled the Delancey fire outside his authority. You said you dealt with him. Where is he now? A pause. Why? Because if Valentina is using information to destabilize you, you need to understand where she's getting it. Someone fed her the Castellan connection, and she fed it to the anonymous number that texted me. That's a chain. The property manager might be a link in that chain. She looked at him steadily. If Valentina has been building a file on your vulnerabilities, Salvatore doesn't know she's been doing it. That's its own problem for her. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not the reading look, not the careful assessment. Something more like the look of a person encountering something unexpected in a place they thought they knew the map of. You've been thinking, he said. I've had 5 days of almost nothing but time to think, she said. Give me something to do with it. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, Enzo, without looking away from her. Enzo came forward. Bring the car around and get Ricci on the phone. He looked at Leora. You need to go back to your grandmother. Don't let anyone into that room who isn't hospital staff with a badge you've personally checked. I'm sending 2 men to the floor. And you, she said. I'm going to make some calls, he said, and then I'm going to the meeting. Tonight. Tonight, he said. It can't wait. She looked at him. The parking lot, the gray sky, the running car. The hospital behind her with her grandmother in a room on the 4th floor and 2 men about to be stationed outside the door. The texts, she said. What you told me about the fire. I'm not done with that. I know, he said. We're going to finish that conversation. Yes, he said. She nodded. She turned toward the hospital. Then she stopped. Damiano. She turned back. He was watching her. Don't lose the room tonight. Something moved across his face. I don't intend to. She went back inside. The 2 men Damiano sent were outside her grandmother's room within 15 minutes. She didn't introduce them to Evelyn. She sat beside the bed and held her grandmother's hand, and when Evelyn woke up and looked at her and said, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone rebuilding her speech, What's wrong? Leora said, Nothing, Gran. Everything's okay. And she said it with enough steadiness that Evelyn let it be, which was either trust or exhaustion, and either way, Leora was grateful. At 6:30, her phone buzzed. Damiano. On my way to the meeting, Ricci found something. The property manager has been on Valentina's payroll for 8 months. She owns the chain. She stared at the message, typed back, That's your weapon. Use it. 3 minutes of silence, then, I'll be in contact when it's done. Don't open the door for anyone. She put the phone down. At 7, her grandmother fell asleep again, and Leora sat in the orange plastic chair and stared at the floor and tried to map everything she knew. The Delancey fire. Nina Vega with burn scars. The property manager on Valentina's payroll for 8 months. 8 months of feeding her information, of building a file, of preparing for exactly this moment. Valentina hadn't panicked when Damiano rejected her. She'd planned. She'd been patient, and she'd planned. And the plan had a shape that Leora could almost see the outline of. A plan designed not just to remove Leora, but to give Salvatore De Luca a reason to remove Damiano. She thought about who benefited. Valentina, yes. But Valentina alone couldn't execute this. She needed her father's weight behind it, which meant she needed to walk Salvatore to a conclusion he'd reach himself once the information was in front of him. The information being Damiano Moretti was compromised, distracted, making personal decisions that created operational exposure, unstable. The proof being 5 days of documented attention to a woman with no power and no network, a woman who is now sitting in a hospital room with a grandmother in a bed and 2 guards outside the door and no idea how any of this worked. She was the proof. She was the weapon Valentina was using. The phone buzzed again. Not Damiano. Unknown number. The same one. He walked into it. De Luca has people at every exit of the building. This isn't a meeting. It's a trap. She was on her feet before she finished reading. She called Damiano. Straight to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She called Enzo. It rang 4 times, and then a voice she didn't recognize said, "This phone isn't available right now." She stood in the hospital room with both men outside the door and her grandmother asleep in the bed, and Damiano's phone going to voicemail, and thought with extreme clarity about what she knew and what she had and what she was willing to do with it. She knew the meeting location. Damiano had mentioned it on the way inside. The De Luca building on Harmon Avenue, a legitimate real estate company used for legitimate meetings, 5 stories, corner of Harmon and Westing. She knew Enzo's number wasn't reachable. She knew the unknown contact was either an ally or a more sophisticated trap, and she didn't have time to determine which. She opened the door. The 2 men outside turned to look at her. "I need to leave," she said. The taller one shook his head. Mr. Moretti's instruction was, "I know what his instruction was," she said. "I'm telling you I need to leave. You can come with me or you can stay here. If you come with me, you stay with my grandmother and you don't follow me." "Ma'am, my grandmother's name is Evelyn Bennett," she said. "She's 73 years old and she had a stroke 4 days ago. And she is the only family I have and I need you to stay with her." She held the taller man's eyes. "That's what I need from you. Can you do that?" He looked at her for a moment, some calculation moving behind his face. "The car is downstairs," he said. "Keys are with the driver. The driver's name is Sal." She ran. The car was where he'd said. Sal was a heavy-set man of about 50 with a face like a closed fist. And when she got in the back and said, "Harmon and Westing, now as fast as you can," he didn't ask questions. He just drove, which told her something about how Damiano ran his operation, the particular quality of the people he trusted with proximity. The city at night in January, the streets cleared from the storm, the black car moving fast through the cold. She sat in the back and breathed and thought about what she was doing. She was going to a building where a powerful man had invited the man where Damiano was walking into something Valentina had built over 8 months specifically to end him. She had no network, no weapon, no leverage, and no plan beyond arriving. She had one thing. The unknown contact had told her. The property manager on Valentina's payroll was Valentina's chain and Valentina's exposure. The chain ran from the manager to Valentina and it ran 8 months, which meant it predated Leora, which meant this had never been about Leora at all. This had always been about Salvatore De Luca's daughter trying to remove a man who'd walked away from her by positioning herself as indispensable to her father's operation by destroying the thing her father valued most. Damiano's stability. Damiano's reputation for never letting anything personal compromise his operation. She thought about what Damiano had said. The person who sets the frame wins. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. Don't come here. She typed back. "Too late. You don't understand what you're walking into. Then tell me fast," she typed. "I've got about 4 minutes. A pause. Then a stream of text, fast, like someone typing against a clock. Valentina showed Salvatore evidence that Moretti has been using syndicate resources to manage your personal situation. The hospital guards. The car. The property manager investigation. She framed it as Moretti compromising operational security for a civilian. De Luca believes it. He has 6 men in that building, and Moretti walked in with 2. She read it twice. "Who are you?" she typed. Someone who has been watching Valentina build this for 6 months and needs it to end before it creates a problem bigger than one man. "Why didn't you stop it sooner?" "Because I didn't know what she'd drag into it. I didn't know about you." She looked up. Harmon Avenue, the building coming up on the right, 5 stories of glass and steel, lit from inside. A black car she recognized parked at the curb with a driver who was sitting too still. Sal pulled up to the curb across the street. "Wait here," she said. "Miss Bennett, wait here," she said. "If I'm not out in 20 minutes, call whoever you call." She got out into the cold. The wind off the street hit her, and she pulled the cashmere coat tighter and walked toward the building and pushed through the glass door into a lobby that was clean and corporate and empty except for a man at the security desk who stood up when she came in. "Building's closed," he said. "I'm here for the meeting on—" She didn't know the floor. She looked at him. "The DeLuca meeting. Tell them Leora Bennett is here. Tell Damiano Moretti that Leora Bennett has information about the property manager." The man looked at her. He was large. Not Enzo large, but large. And he had the specific held quality of someone performing civilian when they were not. He picked up a phone, said something into it she couldn't hear, looked at her. "5th floor," he said. "Elevators to your right." She walked to the elevator, pressed 5. The doors closed. She stood in the elevator and watched the numbers change and breathed and thought, "You don't have to know what you're doing. You just have to walk into the room." The doors opened. The 5th floor was a conference space. Long table, high windows overlooking the city, and around the table, 6 men she didn't know. And 2 she did. Enzo, who had not been unreachable after all, but had been inside this building, and across the table from him, Damiano, who looked up when the elevator opened and whose face went through 3 distinct expressions in the space of 1 second. Shock, fury, and something that for just a moment looked like relief. At the head of the table, Salvatore DeLuca. She knew him immediately. The kind of man whose authority announces itself in the dimensions of the room, turned to look at her with the measured interest of someone encountering an unexpected variable and deciding whether it was relevant. To his right, Valentina. Valentina, who looked at Leora with an expression that was equal parts fury and something Leora recognized with cold clarity as fear. Because Leora was here in this room, which meant the plan had a hole in it she hadn't accounted for. Nobody moved for 3 seconds. The room held itself in that particular suspended quality of a situation that has just changed shape and hasn't yet decided what the new shape means. 6 men she didn't know, some seated, some standing at the perimeter. Enzo across the table, his face closed down and careful. Damiano on his feet now, not because he'd stood when she entered, but because he'd been standing already. And the look he was giving her contained the fury and the relief in equal measure, and underneath both of them something that was simply her name, the fact of her, in this room where she absolutely should not be. Salvatore DeLuca had not looked away from her since she stepped off the elevator. He was older than she'd expected from the way people talked around his name. Mid-60s, silver-haired, the kind of face that had been handsome for a long time, and had aged into something more durable than handsome. He sat at the head of the table with the absolute stillness of a man who had learned long ago that stillness was more powerful than motion. And he looked at her the way you look at something you need to accurately assess before you decide what to do with it. "Ms. Bennett," he said. Not a question. He already knew her name. "Mr. DeLuca," she said. Valentina's chair scraped back. "This is not—" "Sit down, Valentina." DeLuca's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It had a quality of absolute floor to it, a voice that had never needed volume, because volume was for people who weren't sure they'd be listened to. Valentina sat. DeLuca looked at Leora. "My daughter tells me you're the reason we're having this conversation tonight." "Your daughter's wrong," Leora said. "I'm not the reason. I'm the method. There's a difference." DeLuca tilted his head slightly. An invitation to continue. She walked to the table. She didn't sit. She stood at the far end from him, which put Damiano to her left and Valentina to her right, and 6 men she couldn't fully read at positions around the room, and she kept her posture level and her hands still at her sides, and looked at Salvatore DeLuca and spoke. "Your daughter has had a property manager named Carl Reston on her private payroll for 8 months, she said. His name appears on lease documents for 4 Castellan properties in this city. He's been feeding her information about Moretti Syndicate holdings, operational decisions, asset movements, for 8 months. She paused. Before I existed. Before any of this. She's been building a file on Damiano Moretti for 8 months, with the express purpose of being able to walk into a room exactly like this one and present it to you as evidence that he's a liability. The room was extremely quiet. I'm the accelerant, she said. She used me to speed up the timeline. Used my ex-boyfriend, used my grandmother's hospital room, used an anonymous text message to try to shake my trust in Damiano at the worst possible moment, because she needed me broken and isolated before tonight so that the story she was telling you held together. She looked at Valentina. But I'm still here. Valentina's face had gone the color of old paper. This is... Valentina started. Carl Reston, DeLuca said, flatly, to Valentina. Silence. Valentina, DeLuca said. Carl Reston. She's lying, Valentina said. She has no... The transfers are documented, Damiano said. He hadn't moved from where he stood, but his voice filled the room the way it always did, without effort, with complete authority. 8 months of payments from a holding account your daughter controls through a property investment firm she registered in her mother's maiden name. He looked at DeLuca. I found out 3 hours ago. I came to this meeting anyway because refusing the meeting would have looked like confirmation of everything she told you, and I wasn't going to let her have that. Bertie. DeLuca looked at his daughter. Valentina looked at the table. The silence stretched. Leora watched DeLuca think, watched the actual process of it, the slight movements in his face, the reordering, a man reordering a significant amount of information. It was the kind of thinking that had kept him alive and operational for 4 decades, and it was not fast thinking, it was thorough thinking, the kind that doesn't miss things. Why? DeLuca said finally, to Valentina. One word. Valentina looked up, and Leora saw it then. Under the architecture of the plan, under the patience and the intelligence, and the months of careful construction, a woman who had loved someone and been told no, and had never in her life been told no before, and had organized 4 years of herself around reversing it. It was a terrible thing to see. It didn't make Leora feel generous, but she saw it. He left me, Valentina said. Her voice had changed. The smoothness was gone. He left me for... She looked at Leora. For nothing. For a girl from nowhere who works in a bookstore. 4 years, and he threw it out for someone he found in the snow. You endangered a civilian, DeLuca said. You went to her grandmother's hospital room. I needed... You sent a man to that floor, DeLuca said. You coordinated with her ex-boyfriend. You ran a surveillance operation on Moretti for 8 months without my knowledge, using resources connected to my name, and you did it for... He stopped. His jaw worked once. For this. He chose her, Valentina said. The words were raw now. In front of everyone. He chose her over me. I needed you to understand what kind of man makes that choice. What it says about his... It says, he's a man who knows his own mind, DeLuca said. Valentina went silent. DeLuca looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Damiano. The Castellan property, Delancey Street. The manager acted without authorization, Damiano said. When I found out, I removed him and compensated the family. The family, DeLuca said. Yes, Damiano said. Full compensation, relocation, medical costs for the child. DeLuca looked at him for a long moment. You should have told me about the manager when it happened. Yes, Damiano said. I should have. It wasn't a performance of accountability. It was just true. And it landed true. And DeLuca received it as such. Leora watched the exchange and understood something about how these two men operated. The particular grammar of it, responsibility acknowledged and received without theater. Because theater was for people who needed convincing, and these two men had been in business for 12 years and had built something that required, above everything else, an accurate accounting of reality. DeLuca stood. The men around the room adjusted the way objects adjust when a gravitational center shifts. This meeting is concluded, he said. He looked at Valentina. You'll come with me. His voice on his daughter's name had a quality Leora couldn't describe, except to say that it was the voice of someone who was not finished with a conversation, only moving it to a different room. Damiano. He extended his hand. Damiano shook it. I'll be in touch. He walked to the elevator with Valentina a half step behind him, and for a moment, just before the doors opened, Valentina turned and looked at Leora across the length of the room. It wasn't the look Leora expected. It wasn't fury. It was something emptier and worse than fury. The look of a person who has spent years building toward something and has finally arrived at the place where the building is done and there is nothing on the other side of it. The elevator doors closed. The room exhaled. Damiano crossed to her in 4 steps and stopped in front of her and looked at her face with an attention that was almost physical. "You're all right," he said. Not a question. Checking. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Are you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You walked into that room," he said. "Yes. I told you not to open the door for anyone." "I wasn't at a door," she said. "I was at an elevator." Something moved across his face. Not quite the almost smile, something more than that. "Leora," he said. "I know," she said. "I know I shouldn't have come. I know it was—" She stopped. "But the text said it was a trap, and your phone went to voicemail, and I had a driver and the information, and I made a decision." She met his eyes. "I'll make a different one next time if you tell me what next time looks like." He looked at her. The long room behind him, the empty chairs, Enzo standing at a discreet distance. "There might not be a next time," he said. "This isn't a world that generates a lot of—" He stopped. "I don't want to put you in rooms like this." "You didn't put me in this room," she said. "I put myself here. Because of me. Because of choices that started before you existed in my life," she said. "Marcus, Valentina. The way those 2 things lined up. You didn't engineer any of that." She paused. "But I'm asking you to tell me the truth about the fire. I need the whole truth before I can do anything with any of this." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come with me." They went downstairs and got into the car, and Sal drove without being given a destination, which told her he'd been told in advance or had been told during one of the calls she hadn't been party to, and they ended up not at her building on Delancey Street and not at any hospital, but at a different building entirely. 20 minutes north, a residential tower on the river with a view that cost money she couldn't calculate. His penthouse. She'd known it existed. She hadn't expected to be in it tonight. The city through the floor-to-ceiling windows was enormous and white and cold. The river black between its snow-covered banks, the lights of the far shore blurred by distance. She stood at the window and looked out at it while he poured 2 glasses of something amber from a decanter and brought one to her. She took it, didn't drink. "Carl Reston managed 6 of my properties," Damiano said. "He had authority to handle tenant negotiations, minor renovations, lease renewals. Standard." In December 2 years ago, Delancey had 3 rent-controlled tenants on the 3rd and 4th floors. A buyer came in with an offer contingent on vacant possession. Reston made the decision to accelerate the vacancy. Without me. "An electrical fire," she said. "He paid an electrician to create a fault in the panel," Damiano said. "It was supposed to be minor, smoke damage, enough for an insurance claim, a temporary relocation, a lease termination." He stopped. "It wasn't minor." "Nina Vega," she said. "She was asleep," he said. "The smoke was bad before the alarms went. Her parents got her out, but she was—" He stopped again. "She was in the hospital for 11 days. Leora looked at the dark river. "When I found out," he said, "Reston was gone, left the city. I found him in 3 days. The family received enough to buy a home outright, cover medical costs, every anticipated future cost for Nina's treatment. That's not a defense. I know it's not a defense. A child was hurt because of something that happened under my name, and no amount of money resolves that." "No," she said, "it doesn't. But I made sure they were not left to manage it alone," he said. "That was the only thing I had that I could still do." She turned from the window and looked at him. He was standing with his glass in his hand, not drinking either, watching her with the careful attention he always watched her with, the attention that never demanded anything back but simply remained. "How many things like this are there?" she said. "In 12 years. How many things I'm going to find out about?" "Some," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise." "Bad things. Things that exist in the space between law and the absence of law," he said. "Things that were necessary at the time, or that I thought were necessary. Some I'd do differently, some I wouldn't." "Carl Reston," she said. "Would you do that differently?" "I would have supervised him more closely," he said. "I would have never let him near a building with families in it without accountability." He met her eyes. "Yes. That one I'd do differently." She nodded. drank from the glass. The amber thing was warm and complex, and she didn't know what it was, and it didn't matter. "I need to go back to the hospital," she said. "I know," he said. 5 more minutes." She looked at him. 5 more minutes for what? He set his glass down on the low table beside him and looked at her across the width of the room and said, "For this, for standing here, for you being in one piece and me being in one piece, and this being over, the worst of it." A pause. "I need 5 minutes of that before we go back to the hospital and the rest of it." She looked at him for a long moment, the city behind her through the glass, his face in the warm light of the room. 12 years of a world she didn't belong to, and a child with burn scars, and 6 months of a woman's patient revenge, and a snowstorm, and a coat. She crossed the room and sat on the couch, and after a moment he sat beside her, and they didn't say anything for 5 minutes. And the 5 minutes were the quietest 5 minutes she'd had, and as long as she could remember. Then she said, "Okay." And they went back to the hospital. Evelyn was awake when they arrived, both of them, and Evelyn looked at Damiano with the particular assessment of a woman who had raised a child alone and therefore knew every variety of man and had strong opinions about most of them. And she looked at him for a long moment without saying anything. Damiano stood beside Leora's chair and neither shifted nor performed, just stood. "Sit down," Evelyn said finally. "You're making the room feel anxious." He sat. Leora watched her grandmother and the man side by side in the small hospital room and thought about categories. The categories she'd put people in her whole life. The ones that kept getting violated. The ones she kept having to remake from scratch. They stayed an hour. Evelyn asked Damiano where he was from, and he told her briefly. She asked what he did, and he said import and distribution, and Evelyn's eyes did something knowing, and she didn't press, and Leora thought, she knows. Some part of her knows, and she's deciding what to do with it the same way I am. When they left, Evelyn held Leora's hand at the door. "He waited," Evelyn said, low. "Just the two of them, Damiano already in the corridor." "What?" "In the lobby," Evelyn said. "The first day. When you came down to check, I was awake. I looked out. He waited in the lobby for hours. I saw him." She squeezed Leora's hand. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what I saw." Leora nodded. "Get some sleep," Evelyn said. "You look terrible." "Thanks, Gran." The weeks that followed had a different texture from anything that came before them. Evelyn improved steadily. The left side weakness resolving to something minor, a slight lag, a hesitation, something she worked at every day in the physical therapy sessions that she attended, with the same determined competence she'd applied to everything in her life. Her speech came back fully within 3 weeks. She was home in Ashfield in 6. Marcus did not call again after the 5th day following the breakup. Leora didn't ask what form the conversation had taken. She understood it had been a conversation of the kind that left no room for misunderstanding, and she understood that this was a price of being in Damiano's orbit, and she sat with that, weighed it, turned it over. What happened to Marcus was not violent. She knew that because she'd asked directly, and Damiano had told her directly, and she'd believed him because she'd learned to read the shape of his honesty, which was angular and uncomfortable and never dressed up to make her feel better. What happened was that Marcus Hale encountered the information that the woman he'd been managing for 2 years was no longer in a position to be managed, and that any attempt to revise that understanding would result in consequences he was not equipped for. He left the city 6 weeks later. She found out by accident through a mutual acquaintance and felt nothing in particular about it except a slight, clean relief. Reston, the property manager, was located by people she didn't ask about, and gave a full account of his dealings with Valentina to parties she also didn't ask about. And that account went somewhere she didn't ask about. And the result was that Valentina DeLuca spent 4 months in a quiet kind of exile from her father's operations, working out of an office in a city 200 miles away, while Salvatore DeLuca conducted the kind of internal review that a man conducts when he discovers that trust inside his family was more complicated than he'd understood. She heard all of this in pieces. Some from Damiano, some from Enzo, who had developed a manner toward her that she could only describe as careful respect. Not the deference he showed to Damiano, something more like the regard you develop for a person who has proven accurate under pressure. Some of it she assembled herself from context and implication, from the spaces around what was said. She and Damiano saw each other most days. It wasn't formal, it wasn't announced. It was the accumulation of coffee and hospital visits and evenings in the penthouse looking at the river and the gradual, deliberate process of two people who had both spent a long time keeping their own counsel learning to occasionally keep someone else's. She asked him hard questions about the properties, about the nature of his business, about the distances between what he said and what existed in the world as a result of what he did. He answered them without softening and without deflecting, and sometimes the answers made her go quiet for a long time, and he let her be quiet without filling it, because he'd learned that she was a person who needed to process in silence, and that the silence was an absence. And some of the answers she had to decide to live with, not because she stopped caring about them, because she was a person who lived in the actual world and not in the clean version of it where everything was uncomplicated. And the actual world was full of people who did damage and also built things, people who were capable of cruelty and also capable of standing in a hospital lobby for 4 hours without being asked. And she had to decide whether the damage was something she could hold alongside the rest of it without losing herself. She decided, and she decided consciously, with clear eyes, and she revisited the decision regularly the way you revisit a wound to check its healing right. She found the Vega family. She didn't tell Damiano first. She looked up public records on the fire, found the insurance filing, found a forwarding address through a chain of research that took her 3 evenings in the bookstore after closing. She went to the address on a Saturday morning in February, a small house in a neighborhood 20 minutes from Delancey Street, and she knocked on the door. Carmen Vega answered, a woman in her 40s, dark-haired with watchful eyes, and the contained posture of someone who had been through enough to become cautious about doors. My name is Laura Bennett, she said. I'm connected to the man who owned the building on Delancey. I'm not here on his behalf. I came because I wanted to know if there was anything you still needed, anything that wasn't handled. Carmen looked at her for a long time. You'd better come in, she said. Nina was 10 now, small and quick-eyed, doing homework at the kitchen table when Leora came in, and she looked up and looked at Leora with the open assessment of a child who hasn't yet learned to hide what they're seeing. The burns on her forearms were visible below the pushed-up sleeves of her sweater. She didn't seem self-conscious about them. That somehow was both a relief and a grief. Leora stayed 2 hours. She drank coffee with Carmen and listened more than she talked. She didn't try to apologize for Damiano. She didn't try to contextualize or explain. She just listened, because listening was what she could offer, and because Carmen deserved someone who could sit with what she'd been through without needing to make it more comfortable to hear. When she left, Carmen walked her to the door and said, Why did you come? Leora thought about it. Because I live on the 4th floor, she said. Because it happened 1 floor below where I sleep. Because I needed to know you were real. She paused. And because I needed to know whether I could live with the things I know and still be someone I recognize. Carmen looked at her. Can you? I'm trying to figure that out, Leora said. That's why I'm here. Carmen nodded slowly. She extended her hand. Leora shook it. Come back sometime, Carmen said. Nina likes company. She told Damiano that evening. All of it. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? He said. I need you to know I did it, she said. I need you to know I'm going to keep doing things like that, making contact with people, checking, making sure, not as your representative, as myself. I know, he said. And I need you to tell me if there are others, she said. I'm not asking for a full accounting tonight, but I need to know there won't be a moment where someone walks up to me and tells me something I wasn't prepared for. There will probably be moments, he said. Then prepare me, she said, in advance. That's what I'm asking. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. The winter moved toward spring the way winter does. Not gracefully, not all at once, but in patches, the cold receding and returning before receding again for good. The snow turning to slush, turning to something that was almost mud. The trees along the river beginning to think about what they might do with a warmer month. Evelyn came to the city in March. She stayed in the guest room of the penthouse, which she accepted with the equanimity of a woman who had stopped being surprised by the world's variety long ago, and she cooked in Damiano's kitchen with the focused intensity of someone for whom cooking was both pleasure and communication. And Damiano ate what she made and said it was good, and Evelyn watched him say it and filed it the same way she filed everything. On the third night, after dinner, Evelyn asked Damiano to bring her the small wooden box she'd brought with her from Ashfield, which he did, and she opened it at the table and sorted through its contents. Old photographs, letters, folded papers, until she found what she was looking for. A notebook, small, its cover worn soft with age. "This belonged to my mother," Evelyn said. "She kept her recipes in it, the ones that mattered." She opened it to a page near the middle and pushed it across the table to Damiano. He looked at it. He was still for a moment, and then he looked up at Evelyn with an expression that Leora hadn't seen on him before, something unguarded in a way his face almost never was. "She wrote in here," Evelyn said, tapping the page, "that a recipe is just a set of instructions for making something from nothing. You take what you have, you put it with other things, you apply heat and time, and you get something new that couldn't have existed without the combining." She looked at him steadily. She wasn't just talking about food. Damiano looked at this page for a moment longer. Then he said, "I lost my own grandmother's recipes when I was young. There was nothing to save them on." "Tell me when you remember," Evelyn said. He thought about it. And then, slowly, he described something, a dish from his childhood, something his grandmother made in winter. The ingredients approximate because he'd been a child and hadn't paid close enough attention, and Evelyn listened and nodded and made a small note at the edge of the page. "We'll figure it out," Evelyn said. "Come back and we'll make it." Leora sat at the table and watched the two of them and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. Later, after Evelyn had gone to bed, she and Damiano stood at the window looking out at the city. March, the river still dark, but the ice gone from the banks, the first suggestion of something coming back. "She likes you," Leora said. "She's assessing me," he said. "That's how she shows she likes you," Leora said. He was quiet for a moment. "Leora," he said. "I know," she said. Because she did. She could feel the shape of what was coming the way you feel weather before it arrives. "I'm not going to tell you I'm a good man," he said. "You know enough to know that's not a simple claim." "I know," she said. "But I'm going to tell you that I have not wanted anything the way I want—" He stopped. The city out there, the wide winter-ending river, the lights of everything they both lived inside. "I've spent a long time building things," he said, "protecting things, holding things in place by force of will and the particular kind of fear I generate in people. And none of it has ever felt like this feels." She looked at him. "What does this feel like?" she said. "Like something I could lose," he said. "I haven't felt that in a long time. Most of what I have, I could walk away from. I've always known that." He met her eyes. "I couldn't walk away from this." She reached up and put her hand against his face, his jaw, the warm reality of him. "Then don't," she said. He covered her hand with his. The city went on outside the glass. The river moved in the dark. Somewhere in Ashfield, a woman with a notebook full of her mother's handwriting was sleeping in a borrowed guest room, and 10 months from now she would be well enough to dance at a small winter wedding in a candlelit space overlooking the snow. And Nina Vega would be 11 years old and doing well in school. And Marcus Hale would be in another city living a smaller version of the life he'd tried to engineer. And Carl Reston would be accountable. And Valentina DeLuca would be in a different room in a different city, learning, slowly and with difficulty, that some losses cannot be reversed by force. But that was later. Right now it was March, and the ice was leaving the river, and a woman who had almost frozen to death on Christmas Eve was standing at a high window with a man whose name still made powerful men nervous. And she was not afraid, and she was not naive, and she knew exactly where she was and who she was standing with, and what it cost, and what it was worth. She looked out at the city she'd been living in for 4 years, the city she'd been surviving in, the city she'd walked through alone in the cold, believing she was the kind of person that things happened to rather than the kind who walked into rooms and changed them. She thought about what it meant to stop, not to be stopped, not to be rescued, not to be swept somewhere warmer by someone with more power, to stop yourself deliberately and turn towards something instead of away from it, and hold it with clear eyes and say, "This is complicated and costly and real, and I choose it anyway." That was not something that had been done to her. That was something she had done. She stood at the window and watched the March dark over the river, and felt for the first time in a very long time like someone who had finally arrived somewhere they intended to be.